The difference between pain and suffering is really a question of response. And let me explain a little bit more about that. Pain is something that occurs to you when there is something on your outside world that is traumatizing. Let's say a family member has died, or your child is sick, or perhaps you are in the midst of a disintegrating relationship. These are all events that can bring you tremendous amount of pain. But suffering is different. Suffering occurs when you take a painful event and you make mental movies about it. A narration of a painful event is what crosses you over from the territory of pain into the territory of suffering. And I'll use an example from my life to illustrate this a little bit better. When I was a teenager, my father died quite suddenly, and I had always had a complicated relationship with him. So when he died suddenly, that was an excruciatingly painful event for me. But for years after his death, I suffered tremendously. And why? Because my mind narrated my father's death and our relationship back to me. My mind made movies that sounded something like this. You should have done this differently. You should have treated your father differently. You should have said this to him. All of these mental movies, all of these narrations that were occurring in my mind after that painful event created suffering in my life. So you see, it's a question of response. Even the great spiritual masters of our times, they still experience pain. Pain, it's just something that goes with being human. You will experience painful events in your life. You can't avoid them. You shouldn't avoid them. It's natural. It's okay. But you do have a choice on whether you would like to cross that line that divides pain from suffering. You have a choice. You can experience pain in your life, but not cross into suffering. And how do you do that? You do that by maintaining yourself in a position of stillness and mental quiet. If your mind is quiet, you can live through painful events and not go into suffering. In fact, if you are able to still your mind, to decrease the internal monologues that go along with painful events, you'll notice that the painful events in your life, you can experience them in shorter bursts. You'll notice that you can process pain more quickly when your mind is still. So you see, it's a choice. You can choose to experience pain in your life without crossing in to the territory of suffering. That's why the Buddha said that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. It's one of his most favorite quotes and famous quotes that he used a lot. Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. And that's what he meant. You have a choice whether you want to cross from pain to suffering. What are you going to choose?